Forever young, forever caring, everyone's confidant, counselor, preacher, teacher, and friend, Lynn Laughlin has been our connection. It was a role he nurtured at Westside Christian Church in Springfield as a young sidekick to his popular preacher father, Ernie Laughlin. And Lynn carried this role into his high school years, with connections made and maintained with a group of friends affectionately known as the Mafia, a crew of 14 guys who've kept in close contact, reuniting often over the years, sharing stories, and catching up on where life has brought them. Lynn took the role of preacher for the group, offering counseling and even performing weddings and funerals. But it was in the fall of 1960, when he enrolled as a student at Lincoln Christian College, that Lynn began a journey which would eventually cross paths and connect with so many of us. No other single person cuts across the history of Lincoln alumni as does Lynn Laughlin. Recently, a group of his former basketball and baseball players gathered on campus to share stories, to laugh, and to reflect on the man they came to know as Coach.
We were up at Fort Wayne. We were on a basketball trip. We traveled in cars and then we stayed in homes. Lynn made sure that we would go to the church and represent the college as best we could. And we were staying at home, and then the next morning Lynn was going to preach. So he got up to preach, and he got up behind the pulpit, and he opened his Bible, and he couldn't find his sermon. And he looked down to the group of innocent-looking young men that were sitting there, and he said, "Gentlemen, I don't know which one of you are going to preach, but if you don't want to preach, make sure during the prayer that my sermon hits the pulpit." So during a very short prayer, his sermon made its way to the pulpit. I know who had it, but that remains a secret. I don't think he's sitting next to me, but that's all right. Well, I've known Lynn 54 years, not quite as long as Craig. And my one word would be family. We've cried together, and we've laughed together. We've gone through some things that were unbearable, both he and I, but he was always there. You knew if you could count on anybody, you could count on Lynn. Coach was always there. Now you wonder, who's going to pick up the pieces? Who's going to be the one that you go to? Who's going to be the one that you say, "Coach, I just really don't know what to do"? But he would have an answer. I guess my word is family.
Well, I just have one story. Like Royce said, thousands of stories, if every guy here could tell. When I was a sophomore, I hurt my knee, and I had it drained twice before we went on a 3-school trip to play College of the Scriptures in Louisville and Kentucky Christian College in Grayson, Kentucky. If you don't know where that is, you can't find it anyway. And Cincinnati Bible College in Cincinnati. So it was the first game against College of the Scriptures, and we were just beating them bad. It wasn't pretty. And everybody played in the game except me. I was down at the end. I was usually a starter. And about 3 minutes to go in the game, Lynn said, "Craig," and I started down there to take off my warm-up jersey, and he turned with that grin that he had lots of times and handed me his cup and said, "Get me a glass of water." So I wasn't real happy, but anyway, I got him a glass of water and sat back down, and the next night we played Kentucky and beat them, and then beat Cincinnati, so it was a great trip. I've known Lynn for over 55 years, and he was a great friend. I called him a couple times to help with some issues in our family, and because we were a long ways away, and he jumped right in, and he was involved, even the last 7 years or whatever, when he was having all this trouble with breathing and stuff, when I talked to him on the phone, he would always say, "I'm doing okay, I'm doing okay." And I knew that wasn't true, but he was just an awesome friend, and I don't know how anybody could be a greater example of friendship and than he was to me and thousands of other people. And I really appreciate him and his life and his family and his dedication to God and to this school. I wrote in the thing that I think he's the GOAT for Lincoln Christian College and LBI and Lincoln Christian College and Lincoln Christian University and Lincoln Christian Seminary. He's the greatest of all time, in my opinion, out of this place. And I thank him for that. I thank his family for supporting him, and he was just a great friend.
Blessed to have lived in Lincoln for 23 years, and God gave me a great gift in 1975 when he gave me a friend, an encourager, and a brother. Proverbs says there's a friend that sticks closer than a brother, and that's what I think of when I think of Lynn. I didn't meet him in the same way that a lot of these guys got to. I not only didn't know him, I had never heard of him. And in fact, I hadn't even heard of Lincoln Christian College and Seminary until 2 weeks before. I asked my dad to drive me. It was the first time either one of us had ever been in the state of Illinois. We got on campus after a lot of these guys had already left school for the second semester, and this place was like a ghost town. The only person that we found, there was nobody in the administration building, admissions area, nobody in Restoration Hall. The only person we found on campus was a missions professor by the name of Max Ward Randall. And he was so kind, so welcoming, just so encouraging to my dad and I. And little did I know, about 3 or 4 days later, I got something in the mail. And it was a letter from a guy named Lynn Laughlin. And instead of sending me a brochure or a catalog or anything like that, he proceeded to write in his letter 2 or 3 pages describing Lincoln Christian College and Seminary and why I should consider it for a semester or a year. And long story short, I did come to Lincoln. Fast forward several months later, and I was on a road trip with a couple of these guys. And what Coach Laughlin did during that time is all of us transfer and freshmen, we weren't able to go on all the trips. And so he made a rotation. And so I was really disappointed because the first 2 or 3 of those trips I didn't get to go. One day late in the week on a Thursday or a Friday, he called E1. I was over in the men's dorm in Titus, and he said, "Get your stuff in a bag and get out to the parking lot." And I said, "Well, you guys are already packed and ready to go." He said, "Well, you're not going to get to ride in the varsity van. You're going to ride with Stuart Rose and the cheerleaders." And I said, "Okay, Coach." And so we went on our road trip, and I'll never forget it. Later on that night, we were playing a team over in Indiana, and it was just a rough and tumble, really rugged game. They were just really physical and all that, and our guys were frustrated, and Lynn was frustrated. His neck turned red, his face turned red, and this has been going on for, we're in the second half, early to mid of the second half, and all of a sudden there was a quiet in the gym. And Lynn bellowed out for all to hear, "No ambulance, no autopsy, no foul." And the whistle blew, and the referee gave Lynn a technical foul. It was still quiet, and he pointed at the ref and he said, "Thank you. That's the first call you've made right all night." But these guys have all been talking about difference makers, and we all are lucky to meet and be encouraged by a lot of different difference makers. But for me personally, I wouldn't be in ministry today. Lynn was my difference maker. Outside of my dad, my brother, and my son, I've never met anyone greater than Lynn Laughlin. So my word, I think I'd go with relentless. He was relentlessly for me in every aspect of my life. He modeled that in everything that he did. When I saw him with his family, with Lois, Marty, Sarah, Riley, Stephen, Missy, Tasha, he relentlessly loved them. Everything that they did. What a great example for all of us to see that kind of love. But he was like that here on campus with everybody, just pouring out energy. That's why that relentless just keeps coming back to me, just tireless, just like an Energizer bunny, just continually trying to do something else for you that was positive and uplifting. One example that stood out and why I'm using relentless, when my parents died, when my dad passed away, they had moved to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he and Craig and Paul Sims and a bunch of these people came to the funeral, but here's the crazy thing, they got there before I did. I was on a road trip with the basketball team in, of all places, Anchorage, Alaska. Got woken up at 3 in the morning that I needed to get home, and that's how relentless he was. He beat me to my own dad's funeral. And there are a lot of other ways that he showed that, but where it really comes into play is in ministry. When we all saw that modeled for us on a day-to-day basis, I think his hope was that we would do that very same thing in our lives and in our ministry. Today is a great example for me. I'm here trying to emote with these brothers and sisters, and I need to leave here in a few minutes and go to a wedding. And I can just see him smiling or laughing because that's the way he lived his life. How many of us were married by Coach? Several of us, because he was relentless.
I feel, of course, very fortunate, like all of the guys here today, to have a chance to say something good about Coach. But I feel like I had this added blessing that God knew I needed a little extra mentoring. Coach has been, I knew he was Lynn long before he was Coach. He preached at a small church in my camp area, so I saw him once a month at these things called youth rallies ever since I was 10 years old. And then at church camp in the summer, and he made you become this kid who goes to church camp and never goes home. You just sense the presence of God a little bit more around him. And for me, I look at that, and there are some friends that stick closer than a brother. There's some mentors, there are some heroes, and there's some legendary, godly, epic people, and that's who he was to me for such a long time. Now, I think of all the stories you could have. I can remember campfires. I remember him talking about Saul's life in 1 Samuel 15, and don't be a person who grows up to compromise, and integrity things. And he, there were those spiritual moments, but there was something about Coach that The story that I remember, we're coming back from Ozark. And of course, the trip to Ozark, for those who might remember, it was the Grand Prix, road construction or not. And he's playing cards with the guys with one, you know. So not to scare any of you on that, but he just was so fun, so engaging, so many great things for us as young men to be able to identify with. So we're coming back, and for some reason we stop in Springfield. Now, his dad preached at Westside, okay? He was the Pope back in the day. So Ernie was the man about town, and Coach, he knew the town really well. So we're stopping at Dairy Queen. I'm sitting next to, I think Galen is over here, Galen Winters, somebody else's shotgun. Coach, of course, is driving. Stan Motley's behind me. And we all get something to Dairy Queen. I get a shake. Galen gets hot fudge. You know, Stan, it was kind of fun. He says, "No, Kathy's told me I need to cut back. I won't be getting anything." So he didn't get anything. He'll be listening to this now. So anyway, you can tell just a whole lot of fun. And all of a sudden, as we're ready to leave the Dairy Queen in Springfield, 3 or 4 cars come in real close. So he's going to have to maneuver. So all Coach needs is one more driving maneuver on the way home to Lincoln. And he does, weaves in and out, and he looks over to whoever was riding the shotgun, and he says, "I know this town like the back of my hand." Guns it, slams into a telephone pole. My shake goes all over Stan. Poor old Galen, hot fudge, you know, like that, and it's a mess. And nothing on me at all. And Coach looks back at me, sees I'm the only one who didn't get anything on him, and he just says, "Oops," you know. All he had, just a little oops. There was something that was so endearing about he was very much in touch with the child within. He made it easy for us to feel like becoming this godly person he was inspiring us to be. It made it somehow doable. Somehow, okay, if I can be a little more like him, then maybe God can use me. So that's just, I know, one of many that all of us kind of have. For me, it's, as the other guys have said, it's so hard to come up with just one word. So let me cheat for a second, then I'll get back to what I need to do. I would say my first, in a phrase, Coach was all of the above. I mean, there's A, B, C, and D. D is always all of the above or none of the above. Everything that will ever be said about Lynn Laughlin is just one big amen for me. He's all that, as in so many ways. But if I had to choose a word, I'd go with accessible. He was willing to give access to him, and he wasn't a detached scholar or the coach that you never really approach because you don't know what kind of mood he's going to be in or anything like that. In my experience, it felt like if God is accessible like Coach is, then I can talk to him the way I could probably talk to Coach as well. It made himself available, and not just to ball players, athletes. Good night. I've never seen anybody know everybody's name. All over the place, just everywhere. I mean, he'd rattle off every kid in New Testament class first semester. You know, we're 3 weeks into class. He knows where they're from. Knows he took that type of interest, and yet he made himself accessible to us. And that just followed up with that faithful pastoring of me and us who needed that. My mom passed away in '77. He couldn't make it, but he called before the ham sandwiches and potato salad were all gone at our house. He just immediately connected. And my dad passed away a year ago, and he was there packing oxygen. He was just there. So you knew he cared, and you knew he'd communicate. He tried to be accessible to everybody. And if you would, I think, talk to the many who have come through these halls here at Lincoln, whether they played ball in any form or not, they'd probably say about the same thing about Coach. He cared so much, he sacrificed time just so we could have a moment with him somehow.
My story is maybe just a little bit more serious. I had a lot of times of laughter and levity with coach. It was one time of laughter after another, and he kept a lot of joy in my life when I needed that. Didn't understand that in Christianity could get along when I first came to back then what was LCC, but he taught me the joy of salvation, a lot of things as time went on. But on a serious note, my freshman year when I came in, I didn't know Coach either. I don't know who else mentioned that earlier, but I didn't know who Lynn Laughlin was. I didn't know his daddy. I didn't know the lore that went with that. But very quickly I realized, he was going to be somebody at least concerned with my life. And yet, I had a lot of growing up to do and a lot of development to do in basketball. That's an understatement. And so I came in, I was going to play guard for the first time in my life, and here was 4 guards playing ahead of me, that had already been here before. And I was like, okay, this is going to be the valley of the shadow of death my freshman year, and it was. I think I dressed 3 times for varsity. The rest of the time I was relegated to that valley. And I began to cop an attitude and began to think, well, maybe I don't want to do this anymore. And somehow the wind of that got to Coach Laughlin. I can remember a spring day in April of 1973, and I'm walking towards one of the dorms, and here came Coach, and he had kind of a funny look on his face that I didn't see very often. He wasn't real happy, and he wanted to know if I was coming back, and I said, well, I'm having doubts about that. He said, let me tell you some information you need to know. I'll never forget how he had this really unusual Lynn Laughlin look on his face. He said, yeah, it's right, you got 4 guards ahead of you, and there's something you don't know. And I thought, well, here comes a ray of hope. He says, we're going to a 1-guard offense next year. I thought, well, that's a party waiting to happen. That'll be great. And then he paused, a pregnant pause. And he said, Mike, he said, next 3 years, I'd like you to start for me. And I looked at him with the oddest look, like, that seems contradictory to everything I've experienced my freshman year. He said, Mike, we're not going to have this conversation again. And I don't want you talking to other people about it as long as I'm living. Well, see, now I can tell it. And I said, Coach, I'll really take that to heart. So he talked to me just a little bit later. Lincoln High School had a great team that year, and they'd gone to state. And they were going to be working out at the high school every night all summer long. I think George came up a couple times, and we hung out together doing that. And my brother Chuck was coming in. He'd played at West Point for a year, and he was going to play here the next couple of years. And we kind of together went out and worked our way onto the opposing team. So I spent all summer getting my brains beat out by a bunch of guys that were all Division I basketball players. I think Norm Cook went on and played at Kansas, and Timmy Bushnell went on and played over at University of Illinois, or tried to. And those were the kind of guys that were beating my brains out all summer long, but it did teach me a lot about basketball, and I tried to get better. And Coach kept working with me and really gave me hope. The purpose of this story isn't just to glorify Coach Laughlin, it's also to say his timing was impeccable. And he knew things. He knew where the hidden treasure was in life. I would later meet Cindy on this campus. He kept me here. That's my wife of 48 years. My daughter Tiffany came here. My brother Chuck came here because I was here, and this was the only place we knew it was a Christian college. We didn't know anything about it, really, in our world. And my sister Sandy came here to school. 2 of my sons-in-law came here to school and played ball here. There's so many good stories that have come out of what was nothing more to the less experienced eye than just a brief conversation on a sidewalk where a coach was turning aside to show a little love to somebody that was disillusioned. But because of that, there were a lot of tentacles that came off of that, and a lot of good, thank God, not me, a lot of good things came out of that. And I've thought 1,000 times, if he doesn't have that conversation, does life turn out a lot more different? And I believe it would have. I've been thankful my whole life for the life I've been blessed with and given. And I think it started in some way even that April in '73, thanks to Lynn Laughlin. The word I chose isn't really a word, it's an abbreviation. And it was GPS. in my life, I put a lot of stock in what people bring to the table that get me from where I am to where I want to go, especially if they're trusted. And in my life, the first part of GPS for me from Coach was he was a realist about where I was. I had come here with all kinds of stories about what I did or didn't do when I was in high school, and it was usually to self-aggrandize in some fashion. I'm not proud of that, but he checked up on that, knew the stories, and loved me anyway, a lot. And so he was a realist about where my point A was, what my current reality was. That was important because if he was going to get me to where I needed to go, he was going to have to be a realist about that too. And I knew his steps could be trusted. I knew his directions could be trusted. And they would be flawless. And he knew the best route. And that could be trusted. And I never once in my life was given a reason not to trust the guidance that got me from where I was on the way, not finished yet, of course, to where I might want to end up. And I'll never forget that there's been very few people in my life that I trusted that way, but he was at the top of my trust list as my guaranteed GPS system for life.
The word I would pick is encourager. I think we've all experienced people in life that are balcony people and basement people. Basement people that are negative, balcony people that are positive. And I feel like Coach has been in my balcony cheering for me and encouraging me for many, many years now. And whether it was still in high school and the phone calls he would make, talking to me about Lincoln, asking me about how the game went that night that I'd played in, whether it was him calling me when my parents passed away, whether it was just in ministry from time to time checking on me. He truly was a person that I thought was in my balcony, cheering me on and encouraged me for the last 40 plus years. I just want to start out by saying, you know, how could you ever forget somebody that gave you so much to remember? And he did that. And I could talk about being on the baseball field with Coach. I could talk about church camp. I could talk about going to Cardinals games. I could talk about him being in my wedding. I could talk about the last several years doing lunch with him every couple months. But I think the story I want to tell is we're on a spring road trip to Texas. And we had been doing well. We hadn't lost a game yet. And we'd just gone out to eat, and we're in Dallas, Texas. And like these people said, he didn't just teach us about a sport, but he tried to teach us life lessons, history lessons, driving lessons. And we are in downtown Dallas, starting to get dark. He's probably playing cards with us as he's driving. And he wants to make sure he shows us the building that Lee Harvey Oswald shot John F. Kennedy from. And so he's determined, he's persistent, and we are now going down the wrong way on a one-way. And it didn't bother him one bit. We kind of were trying to warn him, but he wanted to make sure he pointed out the exact window that he shot out of. And so here we are, downtown Dallas, getting a history lesson. And I think the point is, Coach taught us how to take advantage of any situation and to maximize that. And again, he just wanted to make sure it wasn't just a baseball trip, it was a fun trip, and that he could give us a little educational experience in Dallas, Texas.
Well, Coach impacted my life in several different ways. I mean, he's one that kind of pointed my wife out to me. said, "Hey, how about that Darla Willard girl?" And sure enough, I'm sure glad he did, because that's led me to stay here in Illinois and to the job and the family that I've been blessed with. And he always says, "Hey, I'm the one that." I said, "Thank you, Coach. Thank you." But I want to tell you about a story that comes from a baseball trip we took to Great Lakes Bible College. We were playing up there in Lansing, Michigan, and when we had a full van, we often had to drive an extra car. Bobby would often drive his car, and we would always load up on water balloons. We had a 5-gallon bucket in the back of the vehicle, and we'd drive alongside the school van and say, "Coach, we got something to ask you." And he'd say, "What?" "Roll down the window." And so he'd roll down the window, just a little bitty crack, and he'd say, "Oh, roll down more, Coach." "Oh, no, I'm not going to do that." "Sorry, boys." "Sorry, boys." That was usually the answer. Well, that night we stayed in a hotel up there, and it was a cold, cold April night in Michigan. And we still had some water balloons left, and so they were pretty cold in the morning. So we're driving toward the field. The van was in front of us, and all of a sudden, where the van had been going on pretty good speed because it was Coach driving, it slowed way down. And as it slowed down, we looked, and beside the road were a couple of young ladies jogging. And we knew exactly what we were supposed to do, so we grabbed some balloons, and one out of the sunroof and one out of the side window, and we doused those girls. And then we took off. So we got to the field, and Coach looked at me and said, "I cannot believe you threw water balloons at those girls." And I looked at him and said, "I can't believe you slowed down so that we can do that." So that's just one of my favorite stories. There are many, many stories, as everybody's mentioned here, of the time we spent with Coach. So I loved that man. So to me, Coach was always selfless. When he would ask questions, always ask questions. How you doing? How's your wife doing? How's the family doing? And even when things were challenging with him, he still thought of others. Mm-hmm. And we know that from being with him the last few years, having lunch with him every 3 months or so. It's just been good, and he's always concerned about other people, and that comes through and shines through so brightly, and makes a difference in my life, I know.
I don't have a specific story, but I played for 4 years, and then I stayed a year and was an assistant coach with him. And trips to Ozark were mentioned. Those were amongst the longest trips. And driving back at night, often either sitting shotgun or sitting with your back up next to the engine compartment, and him telling stories. And you could ask him questions. You know, you got guys in the back that are asleep, and the things I learned from him, mentor is a word that's been used. I mean, that's what I would use, because he would take the time, and he was genuinely concerned that you had questions. I still remember him telling stories about his brother Kirby in high school. And just being a friend, being present with us whenever he was around us. And that was Coach. When I think of Coach, the word present is what comes to mind. Because when you were with him, he was fully engaged, and always made you feel special. And we felt special just for having him, engage us, not just as players, but after we were graduated. He still knew what was going on, and when he would see you, he was engaged. He was present with you, and there's not very many people that are that way, that make you feel, just being in his presence, that you are important.
I'm here just to talk about Lynn talk about who he was and for me, and also, and I remember the first time I met Coach was on a Sunday, and Dave Butts, who was my minister or my youth minister at the time, Dave said, Brad, I want you at the church at 5 o'clock tonight, and we had youth groups at 6, and so I said, why? He said, you just come at that time. So I did show up at 5 o'clock, and Dave takes me into his office, and there's a guy sitting in there, and it's Coach, and he has a white suit on. And if you remember this, I think I got this right this time, Bobby, 1978, and you know that the number one movie on was Saturday Night Fever, and Coach sat there and he looked just like John Travolta. And so sitting there, and we talked and had a great time. But that white suit to an 18-year-old kid who lived in rural America, that was pretty. I thought if Vinny Barbarino is your head coach, you got it made. So that was just a lot of fun. I've got a lot of other stories. One about a grill. Coach always comes out on the end of that. But I will say this. This is all I really know to say every time I think of Coach. He was God's man for godly men. And so, when I think of Coach, I think the one word is, he was excellence oriented, and I loved some of the guys I got to play with that I wondered how I ever would get in the game, but with Jeff and Rich Green and then watching some of you guys, I think it's important for us to know what Coach brought to the table. Not as a coach necessarily, but just as an individual who cared about his players and knew about his players. And he could get in your face too every once in a while, which was a good thing. I remember we were down at Bible Baptist and playing there, and I was having a pretty good game, but we were kind of in a flat spot. And so anyway, finally I hear the buzzer, and it's Coach, and he drags me back to the bench. And he says, you think about this and figure out a way that you can do something for us tonight. And that's the first time he'd ever done that to me. But he knew exactly what to say at the time. And so I just really appreciate that. But he is one of a kind.
If I think about how to describe Coach's coaching in one word, and I guess the impact from his coaching on me, it would be the word patient. He was patient. And when I got to campus, I was 17 years old. I was kind of cocky. I had a bad temper. But he was patient with me. And there were times when he seemed to know when I needed a pat on the back and when I needed maybe a swat a little bit lower. But he would do that in a very caring, patient way. And I look back and I just think it would have been really easy to give up on me, to give up on guys like me, and he didn't. And I think Coach had a way of seeing something in his players that maybe we didn't even see ourselves at the time. And he was patient and knew that someday we'd grow up and maybe someday we'd do something with our lives and for the kingdom. And so because of his patience with me and his patience toward me, it helped me to hang in there. And anything that God has allowed me to do or he's used me, Coach's fingerprints are all over it. And so I really appreciate his patience. Well, from the time I started playing baseball, Little League on up, I had never played on a losing team until I got to Lincoln. And my freshman year, we lost a lot of games, and it wasn't as much fun. And I'd always heard that saying, it's not whether you win or lose, it's how you play the game, which I thought was baloney. I didn't believe that at all. It is about winning. And we were in a game that we could have won. We were playing Lincoln Land down in Springfield at Lanphier Park. And we had the bases loaded with 2 outs, and we were only down by, I think, 1 run. And Coach called timeout, and he put a pinch hitter in. And it was a guy that was the biggest guy on the team, and he came walking up to the plate, and he had 3 bats. He was swinging 3 bats. And the shortstop and second baseman, I was on second, but the shortstop and second baseman came over and started, man, this guy's big. We better back up. This guy looks good. I looked at him, I said, guys, you don't need to back up. He can't hit. Oh, no, why would he put a guy in to pinch hit who can't hit? I said, I have no idea. I don't understand what's going on here. But I said, you're pulling our leg. Nope. Guys, you could put your gloves on the ground and sit on them. You don't need them. And I don't think they believed me, but first pitch, strike 1, he never swung. Second pitch, strike 2, he never swung. Third pitch, strike 3, he never swung. And he did turn around, throw the bat, and said, I couldn't have hit that last one with a telephone pole. And someone said, not if you didn't swing it. And so, and I was mad. I mean, it just bothered me because I thought, we had a shot at winning this game. And then later, I thought, you know what? Coach really didn't care if we won that game so much. I think he cared more about that player and someday how he would be able to tell his kids and his grandkids about when he played baseball at Lincoln Christian College. And that meant more to Coach than whether we won or lost. And even though I didn't like it very much that day, I learned a very important lesson from him.